The whole point was scaring, sort of abusing the audience. Jaws, scaring, frightening us. This thing is sort of, what's mysterious is unknown, and we love it, rather than running from that shark or running from the devil.
There's a reason Close Encounters of the Third Kind still feels otherworldly nearly 5 decades later. But what if we told you the real story behind the film is even stranger than fiction? From the cast's offbeat experiences to production decisions that baffled even Hollywood insiders, what happened behind the scenes is rarely discussed, and even more, rarely understood. Why does this film feel so different from every other Alien movie? What truly went on during its creation? Stick around. We're peeling back the layers of a cinematic enigma that defied every expectation. The spiritual movie Hollywood tried to bury. For a film that would go on to redefine science fiction, Close Encounters of the Third Kind had one of the most hostile beginnings imaginable. Before cameras rolled, before a single frame was shot, Steven Spielberg's deeply personal vision was already on the brink of collapse. The idea of portraying aliens as peaceful, enlightened beings was nearly sacrilegious in 1970s Hollywood, an industry that thrived on fear, destruction, and Cold War paranoia. Every major studio passed on the project multiple times. Spielberg's pitch, focused on wonder and communion rather than chaos and carnage, was simply too alien for executives to grasp. At the time, the science fiction genre was tightly shackled to familiar formulas. Either Earth was being invaded, or humans were discovering terrifying threats in space. Studio heads had no interest in a quiet, spiritual encounter between species. Spielberg wasn't pitching War of the Worlds. He was offering something closer to 2001. A space odyssey, but with emotional accessibility and ordinary characters. It was a gamble that few were willing to take. Even when Columbia Pictures eventually agreed to finance the film, they did so reluctantly, and only because Spielberg had just delivered a monster hit with Jaws. His credibility, not the concept, earned the green light. Behind the scenes, the tension between Spielberg's vision and the studio's demands never went away. Richard Dreyfuss, who played Roy Neary, would later describe how studio executives simply could not make sense of the story. They kept asking, "Where's the explosion? Where's the enemy?" he recalled. What they wanted was spectacle. Aliens attacking, cities burning, humanity on the brink. What Spielberg gave them instead was a deeply meditative, almost religious journey toward understanding something beyond human comprehension. The core of the story wasn't conflict, but connection. To many executives, this wasn't science fiction, it was financial disaster. Terry Garr, who played Ronnie Neary, revealed that the script was in constant flux because of studio interference. Early drafts leaned heavily into invasion tropes, with hostile alien forces and more traditional action beats. But Spielberg fought back. He rewrote the script multiple times to remove those elements and recenter the narrative around awe, curiosity, and emotional transformation. The rewrites weren't just cosmetic, they were ideological. Spielberg was resisting the Hollywood machine every step of the way, trying to protect a message he believed in, that contact with the unknown didn't have to be terrifying. It could be transcendent. Melinda Dillon, who portrayed Gillian Geeler, shared how the studio's anxiety only grew once the budget became clear. The film required extensive special effects, on-location shoots, and massive sets, all for a story that didn't offer the usual genre thrills. There were no laser battles, no alien overlords, just light and music and emotion, she said. The absence of conventional conflict meant executives had nothing familiar to hang on to, and that made them uneasy. Columbia Pictures, already financially unstable at the time, was taking a massive risk on a movie they barely understood. But Spielberg's faith in the story never wavered. He believed the audience was ready for something deeper, something that spoke to our longing for meaning beyond ourselves. It was a story of transformation, not terror, connection, not conquest. And even with the pressure mounting, he refused to sacrifice that vision. Still, the breakthrough didn't come from Hollywood boardrooms. It came from the land, specifically, from a sacred mountain that Spielberg believed could speak for humanity itself. And while studios tried to dumb it down, Spielberg made a move that would elevate the film into cinematic legend by choosing a location no one expected. Devil's Tower, more than just a backdrop. In a film filled with extraordinary choices, the selection of Devil's Tower as the alien landing site might be Spielberg's most powerful decision. To the untrained eye, it was just a striking natural structure, a unique geological formation rising from the plains of Wyoming. But to Spielberg, it was more than scenery. It was a spiritual symbol. He deliberately chose the location not for spectacle alone, but because of its mythological and cultural resonance. Native American tribes, particularly the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Kiowa, have long considered the site sacred. In their oral traditions, the tower represents divine intervention, communication with the beyond, and the meeting point between worlds. For a story about transcending human boundaries, there could be no more fitting setting. Richard Dreyfuss, who portrayed the emotionally unraveling Roy Neary, described his first experience standing beneath the tower as transformative. "You stood beneath it and believed aliens could come here," he said. It didn't feel like part of a movie. It felt like the Earth itself was participating in the storytelling. That natural awe, the feeling of being dwarfed by something ancient and meaningful, helped Dreyfuss access the emotional depth his character required. He wasn't just imagining first contact with an alien species, he was experiencing a real encounter with the unknown. The tower became a conduit for that feeling. Melinda Dillon echoed that sentiment, calling the experience spiritually grounding. To her, the shoot didn't feel like a traditional film production. It felt like a pilgrimage. "It felt like filming at a cathedral built by the Earth," she later said. The location didn't just support the story, it shaped it. It affected how the actors moved, how they spoke, and how they internalized the stakes of the final act. Everyone, from cast to crew, felt they were somewhere significant. The wind, the height, the isolation, it all contributed to the feeling that they were standing at the threshold of something immense. Indigenous mythology loomed large during production, even if it was never explicitly referenced in the script. The tower's long-standing reputation as a spiritual site wove itself into the DNA of the movie. The entire film is about communication between worlds, and Devil's Tower had always symbolized that connection. Spielberg never treated the location as a mere backdrop. It became an integral character in the narrative, a silent, immovable witness to humanity's leap toward understanding the cosmos. To place the climactic scene in a location of such spiritual and cultural significance only served to augment the film's message all the more. It was not just about humans and aliens. It was rather humanity coming into contact with the divine, the unknown, the future. Thus, the descent of the mothership and the illumination of the tower by heavenly light were not only cinematic, but also somewhere of ritualistic significance. This casting of the heavenly light upon the tower, almost like that of a rite, feels like a long-awaited coming together of the earthly and the cosmic. François Truffaut, who plays gentle and observant scientist Claude Lacombe, observed that the location determined the tone for the entire production. The very marriage of myth and science, an arena where the metaphysical and the technological could cohabit without contradiction. To Truffaut, the tower was hope and not fear of the unknown. Hope that intelligence and beauty lay beyond our sky. Hope that some connection could be made, even if over galaxies. And by this time, that connection felt real, and not due to some show-offs, special effects, or tight script twist, but quite simply because of the location in which it happened. Devil's Tower was more than just a place. It was a statement, a holy place for a holy story. But that sense of cosmic wonder didn't end with the location. It extended to a spaceship unlike anything audiences or the cast had ever seen, the mothership that changed everything. Few images in science fiction cinema are as unforgettable as the luminous descent of the alien mothership in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It glides in from above like a vision, glowing with color and humming with possibility. But behind this moment of cinematic transcendence lies one of the most ingenious illusions in film history. Despite appearing colossal on screen, the ship was, in fact, a miniature, just 4 feet tall. Yet, through cutting-edge lighting, clever photography, and Spielberg's instinct for awe, it became a technological marvel that felt enormous, sacred, and completely believable. Richard Dreyfuss, upon seeing the miniature model for the first time, was floored. Even as a miniature, it was absolutely mesmerizing, he later said. The ship's surface was covered in thousands of tiny lights, many of which had to be manually programmed and synchronized for specific sequences. The result was a ship that didn't just look alien, it looked alive. It shimmered and moved with a kind of intelligence, as if responding to the emotions of those watching it. This wasn't just special effects, it was storytelling through design. What made the experience even more powerful for the cast was that the effects weren't added in post-production. The famous light and sound show wasn't just imagined, it was performed live on set. Cast members reacted in real time to a dazzling display of lights, colors, and musical cues. Terry Garr later admitted, "It felt like being inside a living machine." The lights would pulse and shift in synchronization with the now iconic 5-note melody. These weren't placeholder effects or green screens. The actors were immersed in a genuine audiovisual experience, which made their expressions of wonder and disbelief all the more authentic. This live interaction also created a rhythm to the performances. The cast wasn't just reacting emotionally, they were reacting physically, in time with the lights and music. Their movements, pauses, and eye contact all synced naturally with what was happening in front of them. The result was something very rare in science fiction, a scene of spectacle that never felt cold or mechanical. Instead, it felt human, alive with emotion and genuine awe. The ship's design itself was central to this emotional impact. Spielberg had no interest in creating a war machine. The mothership wasn't meant to intimidate. It was meant to inspire. The rounded organic curves, the soft lights, and the peaceful aura gave it the feeling of a cathedral floating through space. François Truffaut compared its arrival to a sacred visitation rather than a military landing. This was a craft designed not for conquest, but for communion. The peaceful design was more than an aesthetic choice. It had philosophical significance. It conditioned how the cast understood the alien phenomena. They were not monsters from another world. Rather, they were advanced beings reaching through the veil of space and time with grace and intention. Richard Dreyfuss put it best. The ship didn't threaten, it invited. In the end, the one invitation Roy Neary accepts is that of the ship, and the very invitation that sets Close Encounters apart from every other alien movie forays out of invasion into cameo. Every detail, from the ship's synchronized lights to its gentle design, reinforced Spielberg's main thesis, that an encounter with the unknown need not be terrifying. It can be beautiful, and it can be transcending. The mothership was not merely a piece of real estate. It was a veritable wish list of things the film dared to say and feel about our place in the universe. And no one embodied the psychological shift that came with alien contact more than Richard Dreyfuss, who nearly lost himself in the role. Richard Dreyfuss and the Breakdown Method. To understand the raw emotional pull of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you have to understand what Richard Dreyfuss put himself through to play Roy Neary. His character's journey, from suburban husband to obsessed seeker of truth, wasn't just an arc on paper. It became something Dreyfuss chose to live out in his own body and mind. In order to authentically portray a man unraveling after an inexplicable encounter, he voluntarily disconnected from his real life. For weeks, he isolated himself from friends and family. "I had to break down my own reality," he later confessed, describing a preparation process that bordered on dangerous. Dreyfuss didn't rely on the script alone. He immersed himself in the world of alien encounter survivors, people who genuinely believed they had seen or experienced something beyond explanation. He interviewed dozens of them, taking notes on their behavior, emotions, and speech patterns. He wanted to know what it looked like when someone was no longer fully rooted in the world everyone else accepted as normal. And it wasn't just about mimicry. Dreyfuss dug into obsessive-compulsive disorder research and trauma psychology. He read about how trauma manifests in daily behavior, how the brain tries and often fails to process the incomprehensible. One of the film's most iconic moments, the mashed potato scene, wasn't even in the script. Dreyfuss improvised it based on his research into compulsive behavior. His character's need to sculpt Devil's Tower out of his food wasn't about plot, it was about psychology. Roy Neary wasn't just trying to remember something, he was trying to make sense of a truth his conscious mind couldn't contain. The table scene, played for both discomfort and mystery, became a masterclass in showing a breakdown without words. "He wasn't acting," said one crew member. "He was manifesting trauma." This level of commitment didn't go unnoticed or unchallenged on set. Terry Garr, who played Roy's increasingly alienated wife, Ronnie, admitted that Dreyfuss's performance occasionally blurred the lines between fiction and reality. "He scared us sometimes," she said. "You weren't sure where Roy ended and Richard began." His obsession, so vividly channeled, forced the rest of the cast to respond with genuine unease. Every scene with Dreyfuss carried a weight that couldn't be faked. His character was breaking, and that break was real enough to ripple through every interaction. More than anything, Dreyfuss's method acting influenced not only performances, but the very tone of the production. His intensity was instrumental in creating the atmosphere of disorientation and reality slipping away that Spielberg was trying to establish. This was not some sort of emotionally distanced sci-fi. This was raw, in your face, and unsettling. Roy wasn't your typical hero. He was the man falling apart, losing his family, neglecting his job to chase after a vision that no one else could see. And Dreyfuss made you feel that falling apart. In a sense, Roy Neary became an avatar for humanity then, caught between what is known and mundane, drawn to the grand, but hardly able to explain his attraction. That's what made it resonate. It was about aliens. It was also about what happens when the world you know starts opening up, and something gigantic stares back at you. It wasn't just a moment Dreyfuss acted, he lived it. And that moment became the film's emotional heart. But if Dreyfuss was the emotional core, the film's intellectual and artistic weight came from the most unexpected cast member, an icon of European cinema. François Truffaut, art film meets blockbuster. When Steven Spielberg cast French New Wave legend François Truffaut in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, It wasn't just an unusual decision, it was radical. Truffaut wasn't a Hollywood actor. He was a filmmaker, a critic, and one of the founding fathers of modern European cinema. Known for the 400 blows, day for night, and his deeply humanistic approach to storytelling, Truffaut had never performed in a major American production, much less a science fiction blockbuster. But Spielberg didn't bring him in for conventional reasons. He needed to be someone who believed in wonder, Spielberg later said. Truffaut's presence was meant to ground the film in sincerity, not spectacle. Spielberg had admired Truffaut for years, especially the way he infused his films with emotional honesty and quiet observation. In Truffaut, he saw not just a filmmaker, but a soul who could bring genuine curiosity and dignity to the screen. Truffaut, for his part, was hesitant at first. "I'm not an actor," he told Spielberg. "I can only play myself." And that's exactly what Spielberg wanted. He wasn't casting a role, he was inviting a perspective. He wanted a character who would listen, observe, and respond with quiet awe. Truffaut didn't need to act like a scientist. He simply had to be one in spirit. Because Truffaut didn't come from a traditional acting background, Spielberg often directed him in unconventional ways. During production, Spielberg would act out entire scenes, physically miming the emotions and movements he wanted. Truffaut would then copy these gestures with precision. To some, it might have looked mechanical. But what emerged wasn't an imitation. It was something deeper. It was a kind of cinematic empathy. Truffaut wasn't performing in the traditional sense. He was channeling the emotion Spielberg was drawing from him. Richard Dreyfuss said it best. Truffaut didn't act. He existed. And that existence, calm, thoughtful, centered, became a crucial counterbalance to the escalating chaos experienced by the other characters. As Claude Lacombe, Truffaut played a scientist whose approach to the unknown wasn't fear or aggression, but fascination. He observed rather than panicked. He translated signals instead of issuing threats. In a movie filled with emotion, confusion, and obsession, Lacombe became the intellectual and philosophical anchor. His presence alone communicated the film's deeper message, that the unknown should not be feared, but understood. Truffaut's performance subtly but powerfully shifted the entire tone of the film. He gave Spielberg's science fiction story a distinctly European sensibility. Instead of treating the alien encounter as a crisis, Lacombe treated it as a moment of possibility. That one change reframed the whole gist of the affair. The aliens were not antagonists, rather, they were communicators. The focus was not on survival, but on making contact. And Lacombe's coolness was the kind of changing power this paradigm needed. He was the type of scientist one might see in a documentary or foreign drama, not a Hollywood action flick. That created all the cracks of authenticity through which that particular viewing would succeed. Truffaut's involvement, along with Spielberg's, gave a different, more artistic credibility to the whole project. Truffaut was not just some name director there for the sake of surprise, he was in it up to his elbows. He gave suggestions, he gave comments, and he even guided the discussion of how some moments were set up. Spielberg would go with Truffaut's instinct, and many of those creative interplays added weight to the emotion and intellect of the film. François Truffaut did more than simply come on Close Encounters. He acted on it. He gave that film a kind of hushed power that could signify something very deep without ever needing to come out and say it. It was a footprint, nothing more, nothing less. Through Lacombe, it became clear that this was not only about aliens. It was about awe, it was about curiosity, and it was about the intangible longing in man to forge contact. And that meditation had a soundtrack. One five-note melody that would transcend language and transform film history. The music that spoke to aliens. Of all the elements that made Close Encounters of the Third Kind iconic, none has endured in the public imagination quite like its haunting five-note melody. Simple, mysterious, and instantly recognizable, it served not only as the aliens' method of communication, but as the emotional heartbeat of the film. Yet, what many viewers never realized is that this motif wasn't composed as just a catchy theme. It was the result of deliberate, deeply researched work by composer John Williams, who collaborated closely with Spielberg to craft something that felt both scientifically plausible and emotionally resonant. It wasn't just music, it was a message. Williams approached the task with the seriousness of a linguist designing a first-contact protocol. He studied mathematical relationships between tones, looking into how frequencies and intervals could translate across cultures or species. The goal was to create something elemental, something that might theoretically be recognized not just by humans, but by any intelligent life form capable of grasping patterns and harmony. These weren't just notes, they were symbols of intent. They had to suggest curiosity, peace, and intelligence, all in just 5 tones. It was sound as language, stripped of culture, yet filled with meaning. For the cast and crew, the motif wasn't a background track. It was a living part of the performance. Spielberg insisted that the famous musical exchange between the humans and the alien ship be performed live on set. Light cues and music were timed and executed in real time, requiring actors to synchronize their reactions not to imaginary effects, but to a carefully rehearsed symphony of sound and light. François Truffaut later explained, "We weren't just acting. We were participating in a real musical conversation." It transformed the scene from spectacle into ritual. The set became a concert hall, and every reaction from the characters was part of a shared performance. This interplay between music and visuals elevated the moment beyond traditional special effects. The scene was not just about contact, it was about communion. Music became the universal language that allowed 2 entirely different species to understand each other without a single word. It was an emotional climax built not on dialogue or action, but on resonance, literal and figurative. That kind of storytelling was revolutionary for the time, and it helped redefine what science fiction could be. It wasn't about explosions, it was about harmony. For Roy Neary, the 5-note motif became an obsession. It appeared in his dreams, his sketches, his mashed potatoes. It was the thread pulling him away from his ordinary life and towards something extraordinary. The music wasn't just a signal from space, it was a calling. For him and for the audience, those 5 notes became a symbol of destiny, the mysterious force that drives us to seek out the unknown. Richard Dreyfuss later said, "The melody represented our need to communicate and connect with something greater than ourselves." What's even more astonishing is how the melody extended beyond the screen and into real-world science. Since the film's release, the 5-note concept has been referenced in academic discussions about how humanity might communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence. Scientists and linguists have pointed to Close Encounters as a surprisingly thoughtful example of using music as a universal medium. It's not far-fetched. Music, after all, is based on math, and math is the closest thing we have to a shared language with the cosmos. John Williams didn't just write a theme, he created a bridge, one that connected humans to aliens, characters to audiences, and science fiction to something deeply spiritual. The 5 notes of Close Encounters proved that sometimes the most powerful message doesn't need words at all. But for all its idealism, the film didn't ignore the darker side of alien contact. especially when it came to how governments react. The conspiracy that felt too real. While Close Encounters of the Third Kind is best remembered for its luminous visuals and transcendent message, an undercurrent of distrust runs through the entire film, one that grounded the extraordinary in a reality that 1970s audiences knew all too well. The theme of government secrecy, particularly surrounding extraterrestrial encounters, wasn't just a cinematic device. It reflected real fears, real protocols, and, as it turns out, real research. What many fans never realized is that Spielberg didn't invent the film's portrayal of a vast government cover-up from thin air. In preparation for the film, he consulted with military advisors and UFO researchers who had spent years studying how actual governments might respond to first contact scenarios. Cast members later confirmed that many scenes involving the military response were rooted in documented strategies. From the misinformation campaigns to the rapid deployment of secretive field units, the portrayal of the government in Close Encounters was startlingly accurate. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a dramatization of what some officials believed might actually happen. That authenticity hit a nerve in 1977. America was still reeling from the aftershocks of the Watergate scandal, which had shattered public trust in institutions. The idea that the government would lie about something, even something as extraordinary as aliens, didn't seem like science fiction. It seemed plausible. Richard Dreyfuss remarked years later, "People were ready to believe the government would lie about aliens. They already thought they were lying about everything else." The timing of the film's release wasn't just fortunate, it was explosive. It gave voice to the creeping suspicion many Americans felt, that we weren't being told the truth. And it wasn't just audiences who took notice. According to behind-the-scenes accounts, some U.S. government officials expressed quiet concern over how the film might influence public perception. Spielberg had touched a nerve. The line between entertainment and implication had blurred. It's one thing to suggest aliens exist, it's another to suggest the government has already made contact and covered it up. This thread of conspiracy added a chilling edge to the film's otherwise hopeful tone. While the aliens are ultimately portrayed as peaceful, the humans responding to their presence are not always cast in the best light. Scientists are sidelined, civilians are silenced, and truth becomes a casualty of control. Spielberg masterfully navigated this contrast, forcing audiences to ask a difficult question. What if the aliens aren't the problem? What if it's us? Reality, the behavior of governments, wasn't all. Just as the suppression of information, gaslighting tactics, disinformation campaigns, everything sounded all too familiar to those awake and aware during the Watergate years. Today, however, with unidentified aerial phenomena in vogue again, those scenes seem less about being reminiscent of what was thought a paranoid past than an echo of current heated debates. Spielberg's warning vision is as enlightening as ever. But the real topper and the greatest feature of Close Encounters is that it goes farther than fear. It does not yield to that all-consuming and cynical disdain or mistrust, which is portrayed so well and accurately in the real-life feel. This movie recognizes our human weaknesses, our proclivity to hide, control, and fear what we do not understand, yet refuses to allow those human defects to hold sway over who we are. Not a government, not a scientist, not the military. An ordinary man steps forward in the end to take that isolation and make it into contact. A husband, a father, one who will leave fear behind to step into the unknown. And yet, in spite of the suspicion and the fear, that very end leads toward man stepping away from destruction and into the unknown and into transcendence. Close Encounters of the Third Kind wasn't just about aliens, it was about faith, wonder, and the limits of human understanding. From method acting breakdowns to sacred filming locations and eerily accurate conspiracies, the cast and crew revealed a story far deeper than most fans ever imagined. If this changed how you see the film, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories behind cinema's most iconic moments. Now, watch our next deep dive on screen. There's a lot more where this came from.